you were among the gang that followed the narrative of my earlier adventures with Gussie Fink-Nottle? You may have been one of those who didn't happen to get round to it, but if you were, you will recall that the dirty work on that occasion started with a tidal wave of telegrams. And you will not be surprised to learn that I found myself eyeing this mound of envelopes askance. Ever since then, telegrams in any quantity have always seemed to me to spell trouble. I had had the idea at first glance that there were about 20 of the beastly things, but a closer scrutiny revealed only 3. They had all been dispatched from Totley in the Wold, and they all bore the same signature. They ran as follows. The first: Wooster, Berkeley Mansions, Berkeley Square, London. Come immediately. Serious rift, Madeline and self. Reply, Gussie. The second: surprised receive no answer my telegram saying come immediately, serious rift, Madeline and self. Reply, Gussie. And the third: I say, Bertie, why don't you answer my telegrams? Sent you 2 today saying come immediately, serious rift, Madeline and self. Unless you come earliest possible moment prepared to lend every effort to effect reconciliation, wedding will be broken off. Reply, Gussie. I have said that sojourn of mine in the tea bath had done much to re-establish the Men's Sana Incorporate thingamajig. Perusal of these frightful communications brought about an instant relapse. My misgivings, I saw, had been well-founded. Something had whispered to me on seeing those bally envelopes that here we were again, and here we were. The sound of the familiar footsteps had brought Jeeves floating out from the back premises. A glance was enough to tell him that all was not well with ye employer. "Are you ill, sir?" he inquired solicitously. I sank into a C, and passed an agitated H over the B. "Not ill, Jeeves, but all of a twitter. Read these." He ran his eye over the dossier, then transferred it to mine, and I could read in it the respectful anxiety he was feeling for the well-being of the young seigneur. "Most disturbing, sir." His voice was grave. I could see that he hadn't missed the gist. The sinister import of those telegrams was as clear to him as it was to me. We do not, of course, discuss the matter, for to do so would rather come under the head of speaking lightly of a woman's name. But Jeeves is in full possession of the facts relating to the Bassett-Worcester mix-up, thoroughly cognizant of the peril which threatens me from that quarter. There was no need to explain to him why I now lighted a feverish cigarette and hitched the lower jaw up with a visible effort. "What do you suppose has happened, Jeeves?" "It is difficult to hazard a conjecture, sir." "The wedding may be scratched, he says. That's what I ask myself." "Yes, sir." "And I have no doubt that is what you ask yourself." "Yes, sir." "Deep waters, Jeeves?" "Extremely deep, sir." "The only thing we can say with any certainty is that in some way, how we shall presumably learn later, Gussie has made an ass of himself again." I mused on Augustus Fink-Nottle for a moment, recalling how he had always stood by himself in the chump class. The best judges had been saying it for years. Why, at our private school where I had first met him, he had been known as Fathead, and that was in competition with fellows like Bingo Little, Freddie Widgeon, and myself. "What shall I do, Jeeves?" "I think it would be best to proceed to Totley Towers, sir." "But how can I? Old Bassett would sling me out the moment I arrived." "Possibly if you were to telegraph Mr. Fink-Nottle, sir, explaining your difficulty, he might have some solution to suggest." This seemed sound. I hastened out to the post office and wired as follows: "Fink-Nottle, Totley Towers, Totley in the Wold." "Yes, that's all very well. You say come here immediately, but how dickens can I? You don't understand relations between Pop Bassett and self. these not such as to make him welcome visit Bertram, would inevitably hurl out on ear and set dogs on. Useless to just putting on false whiskers and pretending to be fellow come inspect drains, as old blighter familiar with features, and would instantly detect imposture. What is to be done? What has happened? Why serious rift? What serious rift? How do you mean wedding broken off? What have you been doing to the girl? Reply. Gussie. Bertie. The answer to this came during dinner. Wooster, Berkeley Mansions, Berkeley Square, London. See difficulty, but think and work it. In spite strained relations, still speaking terms, Madeline. Am telling her have received urgent letter from you, pleading be allowed come here. Expect invitation shortly, Gussie. And on the morrow, after a tossing on pillow night, I received a bag of 3. The first ran. Have worked it. Invitation dispatched. When you come, will you bring book entitled My Friends the Newts by Loretta Peabody, published Popgood and Grueley, get any bookshop, Gussie. The second. Bertie, you old ass, I hear you coming here. Delighted, as something very important want you to do for me. Stiffy. The third. Please come here if you wish, but oh, Bertie, is this wise? Will not it cause you needless pain seeing me? Surely merely twisting knife round. Madeline. Jeeves was bringing me the morning cup of tea when I read these missives, and I handed them to him in silence. He read them in same. I was about to imbibe about a fluid ounce of the hot and strengthening before he spoke. I think we should start at once, sir. I suppose so. I will pack immediately. Would you wish me to call Mrs. Travers on the telephone? Why? She has rung up several times this morning. Oh? Then perhaps you'd better give her a buzz. I think it will not be necessary, sir. I fancy that this would be the lady now. A long and sustained peal had sounded from the front door, as if an aunt had put her thumb on the button and kept it there. Jeeves left the presence, and a moment later it was plain that his intuition had not deceived him. A booming voice rolled through the flat. The voice which once, when announcing the advent of a fox in their vicinity, had been wont to cause members of the Corn and Pitchley to clutch their hats and bound in the saddle. "Isn't that young hound awake yet, Jeeves? Oh, there you are." Aunt Dahlia charged across the threshold. At all times, and on all occasions, owing to years of fox-chivying in every kind of weather, this relative has a fairly purple face, but one noted now an even deeper mauve than usual. The breath came jerkily, and the eyes gleamed with a goofy light. A man with far less penetration than Bertram Wooster would have been able to divine that there stood before him an aunt who had got the pip about something. It was evident that information which he yearned to uncork was bubbling within her, but she postponed letting it go for a moment in order to reproach me for being in bed at such an hour, sunk, as she termed it in her forthright way, in hoggish slumber. "Not sunk in hoggish slumber," I corrected. "I've been awake some little time. As a matter of fact, I was just about to partake of the morning meal. You will join me, I hope. Bacon and eggs may be taken as read, but say the word and we can do you a couple of kippers." She snorted with such violence that 24 hours later would have unmanned me completely. Even in my present tolerably robust condition, it affected me rather like one of those gas explosions which slay 6. "Eggs? Kippers? What I want is a brandy and soda. Tell Jeeves to mix me one, and if he forgets to put in the soda, it'll be all right with me. Bertie, a most frightful thing has happened." "Push along into the dining-room, my fluttering old aspen," I said. "We shall not be interrupted there. Jeeves will want to come in here to pack." "Are you off somewhere?" "Totley Towers. I've had a most disturbing—" "Totley Towers? Well, I'm dashed. That's just where I came to tell you had jolly well got to go immediately. Eh? Matter of life and death. How do you mean? You'll soon see when I've explained. Then come along to the dining room and explain at your earliest convenience. Now then, my dear old mysterious hinter, I said, when Jeeves had brought the foodstuffs and withdrawn, tell me all. For an instant there was silence, broken only by the musical sound of an aunt drinking brandy and soda, and self lowering a cup of coffee. Then she put down her beaker and drew a deep breath. "Bertie," she said, "I wish to begin by saying a few words about Sir Watkin Bassett, CBE. May Greenfly attack his roses. May his cook get tight on the night of a big dinner party. May all his hens get the staggers." "Does he keep hens?" I said, putting a point. "May his cisterns start leaking, and may white ants, if there are any in England, gnaw away the foundations of Totley Towers. And when he walks up the aisle with his daughter Madeline to give her away to that ass Spinkbottle, may he get a sneezing fit and find that he has come out without a pocket handkerchief." She paused, and it seemed to me that all this, while spirited stuff, was not germane to the issue. "Quite," I said. "I agree with you in toto. But what has he done?" "I will tell you. You remember that cow creamer?" I dug into a fried egg, quivering a little. "Remember it, I shall never forget it. You will scarcely believe this, Aunt Dahlia, but when I got to the shop, who should be there, by the most amazing coincidence, but this same Bassett? It wasn't a coincidence. He had gone there to look at the thing, to see if it was all that Tom had said it was. For, can you imagine such lunacy, Bertie? That chump of an uncle of yours had told the man about it. He might have known that the fiend would hatch some devilish plot for his undoing. And he did. Tom lunched with Sir Watkin Bassett at the latter's club yesterday. On the bill of fare was a cold lobster, and this Machiavelli sicked him onto it." I looked at her incredulously. "You aren't going to tell me," I said, astounded, for I was familiar with the intensely delicate and finely poised mechanism of his tummy, that Uncle Tom ate lobster after what happened last Christmas. At this man's instigation he appears to have eaten not only pounds of lobster, but forests of sliced cucumber as well. According to his story, which he was able to tell me this morning, he could only groan when he came home yesterday. He resisted at first. He was strong and resolute. But when circumstances were too much for him, Bassett's club apparently is one of those clubs where they have the cold dishes on a table in the middle of the room, so placed that wherever you sit you can't help seeing them. I nodded. They do that at the Drones too. Catsmeat Potter Purbright once hit the game pie from the far window 6 times with 6 consecutive rolls. That was what caused poor Tom's downfall. Bassett's lobster sales talk he might have been strong enough to ignore, but the sight of the thing was too much for him. He yielded, tucked in like a starving Eskimo, and at 6 o'clock I got a call from the hall porter, asking me if I would send a car round to fetch away the remains, which had been discovered by the page boy writhing in the corner of the library. He arrived half an hour later, calling weakly for bicarbonate of soda. "Bicarbonate of soda, my foot!" said Aunt Dahlia with a bitter, mirthless laugh. He had to have 2 doctors and a stomach pump. "And in the meantime," I said, for I could see that whither the tale was tending. "And in the meantime, of course, the fiend Bassett had nipped down and bought the cow creamer. The man had promised to hold it for Tom till 3 o'clock, but naturally, when 3 o'clock came and he didn't turn up, and there was another customer clamouring for the thing, he let it go. So there you are. Bassett has the cow creamer and took it down to Totley last night." It was a sad story, of course, and one that bore out what I had so often felt about Pop Bassett, to wit, that a magistrate could nick a fellow for £5, when a mere reprimand would more than have met the case, was capable of anything. But I couldn't see what she thought there was to be done about it. The whole situation seemed to me essentially one of those where you just clench the hands and roll the eyes mutely up to heaven, and then start a new life and try to forget. I said as much while marmalading a slice of toast. She gazed at me in silence for a moment. "Oh, so that's how you feel, is it?" "I do, yes." "You admit, I hope, that by every moral law that cow creamer belongs to Tom?" "Oh, emphatically." "But you would take this foul outrage lying down? You would allow this stick-up man to get away with the swag? Confronted with the spectacle of as raw a bit of underhanded skullduggery as has ever been perpetrated in a civilised country, you would just sit tight and say, 'Well, well,' and do nothing?" I weighed this. Possibly not well. I concede that the situation is one that calls for the strongest comment, but I wouldn't do anything. "Well, I'm going to do something. I'm going to pinch the damn thing." I stared at her, astounded. I uttered no verbal rebuke, but there was a distinct tut-tut in my gaze. Even though the provocation was, I admitted, severe, I could not approve of these strong-arm methods, and I was about to awaken her dormant conscience by asking her gently what the corn would think of these goings-on, or, for that matter, the Pitchley, when she added, "Or rather, you are." I had just lighted a cigarette as she spoke these words, and so, according to what they say in the advertisement, ought to have been nonchalant, but it must have been the wrong sort of cigarette, for I shot out of my chair as if somebody had shoved a bradawl through the seat. "Who, me?" "That's right. See how it all fits in. You're going to stay at Totley. You will have 100 excellent opportunities of getting your hooks on the thing. But dash it, and I must have it, because otherwise I shall never be able to dig a cheque out of Tom for that Pomona Grindle cereal. He simply won't be in the mood. And I signed the old girl up yesterday at a fabulous price, half the sum agreed upon to be paid in advance a week from current date. So snap into it, my lad. I can't see what you're making all this heavy weather about. It doesn't seem much to do for a loved aunt." "It seems to me a dashed lot to do for a loved aunt, and I'm jolly well not going to dream—" "Oh, yes, you are. Because you know what will happen if you don't." She paused significantly. "You follow me, Watson?" I was silent. She had no need to tell me what she meant. This was not the first time she had displayed the velvet hand beneath the iron glove, or rather the other way about, in this manner. For this ruthless relative has one all-powerful weapon which she holds constantly over my head, like the sword of... who was a chap of Jeeves would remember, and by means of which she can always bend me to her will, viz. the threat that if I don't kick in, she will bar me from her board and wipe Anatole's cooking from my lips. I shall not lightly forget the time when she placed sanctions on me for a whole month, right in the middle of the pheasant season, when this Superman is at his incomparable best. I made one last attempt to reason with her. "But why does Uncle Tom want this frightful cow creamer? It's a ghastly object. He'd be far better without it." "He doesn't think so." "Well, there it is. Perform this simple, easy task for me, or guests at my dinner table will soon be saying, 'Why is it that we never seem to see Bertie Wooster here any more? Bless my soul, what an amazing lunch that was Anatole gave us yesterday. Superb is the only word. I don't wonder you're so fond of his cooking. As you say sometimes, it melts in the mouth." I eyed her sternly. "Aunt Dahlia, this is blackmail." "Yes, isn't it?" she said, and beetled off. I resumed my seat and ate a moody slice of cold bacon. Jeeves entered. "The bags are packed, sir." Very good, Jeeves, I said. Then let us be starting. Man and boy, Jeeves, I said, breaking a thoughtful silence which had lasted for about 87 miles. I have been in some tough spots in my time, but this one wins the mottled oyster. We were bowling along in the two-seater on our way to Totley Towers, self at the wheel, Jeeves at my side, the personal effects in the dicky. We had got off round about 11:30, and the genial afternoon was now at its juiciest. It was one of those crisp, sunny, bracing days, with a pleasant tang in the air, and had circumstances been different from what they were, I should no doubt have been feeling at the peak of my form, chatting gaily, waving to passing rustics, possibly even singing some light snatch. Unfortunately, however, if there was one thing circumstances weren't, it was different from what they were, and there was no suspicion of a song on the lips. The more I thought of what lay before me at those bally towers, the bowed downer did the heart become. The mottled oyster, I repeated. Sir? I frowned. The man was being discreet, and this was no time for discretion. Don't pretend you don't know all about it, Jeeves, I said coldly. You were in the next room throughout my interview with Aunt Dahlia, and her remarks must have been audible in Piccadilly. He dropped the mask. Well, yes, sir, I must confess that I did gather the substance of the conversation. Very well, then. You agree with me that the situation is a lulu. Certainly, a somewhat sharp crisis in your affairs would appear to have been precipitated, sir. I drove on, brooding. If I had my life to live again, Jeeves, I would start it as an orphan without any aunts. Don't they put aunts in Turkey in sacks and drop them in the Bosphorus? Odalisques, sir, I understand, not aunts. Well, why not aunts? Look at the trouble they cause in the world. I tell you, Jeeves, and you may quote me as saying this, behind every poor, innocent, harmless blighter who is going down for the first time in the soup, you will find, if you look carefully enough, the aunt who shoved him into it. There is much in what you say, sir. It's no use telling me that there are bad aunts and good aunts. At the core, they're all alike. Sooner or later, out pops the cloven hoof. Consider this Dahlia, Jeeves. As sound an egg as ever cursed a foxhound for chasing a rabbit, I have always considered her. And she goes and hands me an assignment like this. Wooster, the pincher of policemen's helmets, we know. We are familiar with Wooster, the supposed bag snatcher. But it was left for this aunt to present to the world, a Wooster who goes to the houses of retired magistrates and while eating their bread and salt, swipes their cow creamers. Faugh! I said, for I was a good deal overwrought. Most disturbing, sir. I wonder how old Bassett will receive me, Jeeves. It will be interesting to observe his reaction, sir. He can't very well throw me out, I suppose, Miss Bassett having invited me. No, sir. On the other hand, he can, and I think he will, look at me over the top of his pince-nez and make rummy sniffing noises. The prospect is not an agreeable one. No, sir. I mean to say, even if this cow creamer thing had not come up, conditions would be sticky. Yes, sir. Might I venture to inquire if it is your intention to endeavour to carry out Miss Travers' wishes? Mrs. Travers' wishes. You can't fling the hands up in a passionate gesture when you are driving a car at 50 miles an hour. Otherwise I should have done so. That is the problem which is torturing me, Jeeves. I can't make up my mind. You remember that fellow you mentioned to me once or twice, who let something wait upon something? You know who I mean, the cat chap. Macbeth, sir, a character in a play of that name by the late William Shakespeare. He was described as letting I dare not wait upon I would, like the poor cat of the adage. Well, that's how it is with me. I wobble and I vacillate, if that's the word. Perfectly correct, sir. I think of being barred from those menus of Anatoles, and I say to myself that I will take a pop. Then I reflect that my name at Totley Towers is already mud, and that old Bassett is firmly convinced that I'm a combination of Raffles and a peon thimble man, and steal everything I come upon that isn't nailed down. Sir? Oh, didn't I tell you about that? I had another encounter with him yesterday, the worst to date. He now looks upon me as the dregs of the criminal world. If not public enemy number 1, certainly 2 or 3. I informed him briefly of what had occurred, and conceived my emotion when I saw that he appeared to be finding something humorous in the recital. Jeeves does not often smile, but now a distinct simper had begun to wreathe his lips. A laughable misunderstanding, sir. Laughable, Jeeves? He saw that his mirth had been ill-timed. He reassembled his features and ironed out the smile. I beg your pardon, sir, I should have said disturbing. Quite. It must have been exceedingly trying, sir, meeting Sir Watkin in such circumstances. Yes, and it's going to be a dashed sight more trying if he catches me pinching his cow creamer. I keep seeing a vision of him doing it. I quite understand, sir. And thus the native hue of resolution is sickly daw with the pale cast of thought, and enterprises of great pitch and moment in this regard their currents turn awry and lose the name of action. Exactly, you take the words out of my mouth. I drove on, brooding more than ever. And here's another point that presents itself, Jeeves. Even if I want to steal cow creamers, how am I going to find the time? It isn't a thing you can just take in your stride. You have to plan and plot and lay schemes, and I shall need every ounce of concentration for this business of Gus's. Exactly, sir. One appreciates the difficulty. And, as if that wasn't enough to have on my mind, there is that telegram of Stiffy's. You remember the 3rd telegram that came this morning? It was from Miss Stephanie Byng, Miss Bassett's cousin, who resides at Totley Towers. You've met her. She came to lunch at the flat a week or 2 ago. Smallish girl, of about the tonnage of Jessie Matthews. Oh, yes, I remember, sir. I remember Miss Byng, a charming young lady. Quite. But what does she want me to do for her? That's the question. Probably something completely unfit for human consumption. I've got to worry about that too. What a life. Yes, sir. Well, stiff upper lip, I suppose, Jeeves. What? Precisely, sir. During these exchanges we had been breezing along at a fairish pace, and I had not failed to note that on a signpost that we had passed some little while back there had been inscribed the words, "Totley in the Wold, 8 miles." There now appeared before us through the trees a stately home of E. I braked the car. Journey's end, Jeeves. So I should be disposed to imagine, sir. And so it proved. Having turned in at the gateway and fetched up at the front door, we were informed by the butler that this was indeed the lair of Sir Watkin Bassett. "Child Roland to the Dark Tower came, sir," said Jeeves, as we alighted, though what he meant I hadn't an earthly. Responding with a brief, I gave my attention to the butler, who was endeavouring to communicate something to me. What he was saying, I now gathered, was that if desirous of mixing immediately with the inmates, I had chosen a bad moment for hitting the place. Sir Watkin, he explained, had popped out for a breather. "I fancy he is somewhere in the grounds with Mr. Roderick Spode." I started. After that affair in the antique shop, the name Roderick was, as you may imagine, rather deeply graven on my heart. Roderick Spode? Big chap with the small moustache? And the sort of eye that can open an oyster at 60 paces? Yes, sir, he arrived yesterday with Sir Watkin from London. They went out shortly after lunch. Miss Madeline, I believe, is at home, but it may take some little time to locate her. How about Mr. Finknottle? I think he has gone for a walk, sir. Oh, well, righto, I'll just potter about for a bit. I was glad of the chance of being alone for a while, for I wished to brood. I strolled off along the terrace, doing so. The news that Roderick Spode was on the premises had shaken me a good deal. I had supposed him to be some mere club acquaintance of old Bassett's who confined his activities exclusively to the metropolis, and his presence at the Towers rendered the prospect of trying to carry out Aunt Daly's commission, always one calculated to unnerve the stoutest, twice as intimidating as it had been before, when I had supposed that I should be under the personal eye of Sir Watkin alone. Well, you can see for yourself, imagine how some unfortunate master criminal would feel on coming down to do a murder at the old Grange if he found that not only was Sherlock Holmes putting up at the weekend, but Hercule Poirot as well. The more I faced up to the idea of pinching that cow creamer, the less I liked it. It seemed to me that there ought to be a middle course, and that what I had to do was to explore avenues in the hope of finding some formula. To this end, I paced the terrace of the Bent Bean, pondering. Old Bassett, I noted, had laid out his money to excellent advantage. I'm a bit of a connoisseur of country houses, and I found this one well up to sample. Nice façade, spreading grounds, smoothly shaven lawns, and a general atmosphere of what is known as old-world peace. Cows were mooing in the distance, sheep and birds respectively bleating and tootling, and from somewhere near at hand there came the report of a gun, indicating that someone was having a whirl at the local rabbits. Totley Towers might be a place where man was vile, but undoubtedly every prospect pleased. And I was strolling up and down, trying to calculate how long it would have taken the old bounder, fining, say, 20 people a day, £5 apiece, to collect enough to pay for all this, when my attention was arrested by the interior of a room on the ground floor, visible through an open French window. It was a sort of minor drawing room, if you know what I mean, and it gave the impression of being over-furnished. This was due to the fact that it was stuffed to bursting point with glass cases. These, in their turn, stuffed to bursting point with silver. It was evident that I was looking at the Bassett collection. I paused. Something seemed to draw me through the French window, and the next moment there I was, vis-à-vis, as the expression is, with my old pal, the silver cow. It was standing in a smallish case over by the door, and I peered in at it, breathing heavily on the glass. It was with considerable emotion that I perceived that the case was not locked. I turned the handle. I dipped in and fished it out. Now, whether it was my intention merely to inspect and examine, or whether I was proposing to shoot the works, I do not know. The nearest I can remember is that I had no really settled plans. My frame of mind was more or less of that cat in the adage. However, I was not accorded leisure to review my emotions in what Jeeves would call the final analysis, for at this point a voice behind me said, "Hands up!" And turning, I observed Roderick Spode in the window. He had a shotgun in his hand, and this he was pointing in a negligent way at my third waistcoat button. I gathered from his manner that he was one of those fellows who like firing from the hip.